Good afternoon. The first item of business this afternoon is portfolio questions. The first portfolio, Deputy First Minister Responsibilities, Economy and Gaelic. A reminder, if members wish to ask a supplementary, they should press the request to speak buttons during the relevant question. Both this and the next portfolio, there's a lot of interest in supplementaries, so the usual appeal for brevity in questions and responses. I call question number 1. Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what steps it's taking to incentivise businesses to seek opportunities for scaling up.
Minister Richard Lockhead.
The Scottish Government is incentivising businesses to scale up through targeted support, including our £15 million enterprise package and Scotland's first dedicated Series A fund with part equity and the Scottish National Investment Bank as well. And through this Tech Scaler grant, we've provided over £720,000 for feasibility studies and implementation projects. Beyond funding, our £42 million Tech Scaler programme offers specialised infrastructure, expert mentoring and international opportunities through initiatives like our Silicon Valley and Singapore pop-ups, connecting Scottish founders with global investors and markets to accelerate their growth potential.
Alexander Stewart.
I thank the Minister for the answer. Facilitating new business activity is crucial to economic growth, and it's as much about enabling new business as it is about enabling businesses that exist to expand and reach wider markets. A great deal of valuable expertise exists in our small to medium-sized enterprises. Enterprise is that we should be harnessing, Minister. Will the Government consider making a proper assessment of how it can smooth and ease small business transition through these thresholds as they seek to grow?
Minister.
Thank you. Yes, these are the sort of considerations we always have in mind, because we want to clearly support small businesses in Scotland to expand and grow, and also ensure that the venture capital and private equity is there to help them expand as well. Because, as you know, that's been a long-running debate in Scotland about how to ensure that gap is closed. Scottish Enterprise, of course, play a big role here, and they have invested £921 million over the past 21 years. It should be said, leveraging £2.45 billion of private sector investment to help companies scale up, and these figures go up to the 23-24 financial year. And of course, we've got other initiatives like the Scottish National Investment Bank, which helps businesses scale up where the commercial case may not be attracting investment from elsewhere. And that's decisions they take on an ongoing basis. So there's a number of initiatives underway, but yes, we're always happy to consider new assessments.
Brief supplementary, Claire Hawkey.
Recent reports have indicated Scotland is leading the UK in the growth of technology start-ups, and that this success runs entirely contrary to the rest of the UK's overall decline in the sector. Given the Scottish Government's ambition to make Scotland one of the best places in the world to develop, launch and scale up a tech company, what assessment has the Minister made of the success of Scotland's leading Tech Scaler programme?
Minister, briefly.
I thank Claire Hawkey for highlighting some positive reports that have been published in relation to Scotland's performance in that area. Of course, I should say that the Tech Scaler 2024 annual report shows remarkable progress, with over 1,400 members from nearly 1,000 start-ups, and member businesses have raised £118 million in capital since the programme began, and 34.7% of founders identify as female, significantly above the industry average as well. So a comprehensive evaluation of the Tech Scaler programme delivery to date has been commissioned and is currently underway, due to be completed in summer of this year. Of course, that will help us build on these successes and further strengthen Scotland's position as a leading start-up nation.
Okay, question 2, Colin Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to the calls in public petition PE 1979 for gaps in the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry to be addressed, and for an independent whistleblowing officer for education and children's services to be established.
Deputy First Minister.
Well, we are fully committed to ensuring that Scotland's child protection system is as robust as it can be. The Minister for Children has provided several responses to the Public Petitions Committee about PE 1979, which are available on the Scottish Parliament website, and has also met with the petitioners. The Minister's response to the committee, dated the 26th of February, advised that officials are working to understand what improvements can be identified. That includes reviewing current whistleblowing processes and engaging with ongoing reviews, including the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry and the review of GTCS's fitness to teach procedures.
Colin Smith.
Deputy First Minister for that answer, but petitioners have rightly highlighted the huge power imbalance that exists between often the lone victim or whistleblower who seeks to highlight serious child safeguarding failures and the public bodies. Those making the complaints often face, I suppose, huge obstacles, not least because of public bodies' lack of openness and transparency, and often the unlimited legal and financial resources they have to defend themselves against allegations. So does the Deputy First Minister not recognise that what the Scottish Government so far propose is not going to address this huge power imbalance and simply enable public bodies and institutions to continue to mark their own homework? Does she not accept that argument for victims who are arguing for that independent whistleblower to support
Deputy
those who
First
bravely bring forward
Deputy First
their
Minister.
complaints?
Well, I thank the member for that point and very much recognise his primary concern being the eradication of child abuse and the strong accountability of perpetrators. And I will take his comments back to the Minister for Children and Young People and make sure that any proposals that we are proceeding with do have the confidence of those that want a stronger system in place.
I've got a number of supplementaries. I'll try to get them all in, but they will need to be brief, as will the responses. First, Fulton McGregor.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Though the inquiry is still underway, work to improve the protection of children in Scotland should remain ongoing. Can the Cabinet Secretary provide an update on the new Child Sexual Abuse and Exploitation National Strategic Group and its work to support survivors and prevent exploitation?
First Minister.
We are working closely with partners to deliver a coordinated multi-agency response to preventing child sexual abuse and exploitation in all its forms. But in recognition of the need to go further, we've established a new strategic group to provide national leadership and further improve our shared response in Scotland to child sexual abuse and exploitation. The group last met in December and it's due to meet again in the coming weeks. And it brings together key stakeholders, including social work, police, health, education, local authority representatives, expert practitioners, charities, research and academics.
Briefly, Ros McCall.
Thank you. I note the Deputy First Minister's response, but the question relates to gaps in the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry, and the response brings it back to that. There are allegations such as covering up patterns of behaviour among male teachers which relate to physical and sexual abuse, hiding behind GDPR regulations, social workers withholding information from records and placing children at significant risk of physical, sexual and emotional abuse, and cover-ups about mishandling child protection in schools. And that's just to name but a few.
Question.
So can I ask, what more is the Scottish Government doing to fill these gaps in the inquiry to ensure our children are safe?
Deputy First Minister.
Answer my question, the answer to Ros McCall's question in the same spirit that I answered Colin Smith's, which is to recognise the interest of members in ensuring that this is as robust as possible. It is important when it comes to the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry that it does remain independent and that its chair, Lady Smith, has the ability to decide how the inquiry fulfils its terms of reference, which I believe are broad. We've been clear that we'll carefully consider the findings and recommendations from the inquiry and then to move as speedily as possible to implement those recommendations.
We need to move on to question 3. Annabel Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how it is facilitating direct links with markets to promote economic development.
Minister Richard Lockhead.
A trading nation, our export strategy guides our efforts to strengthen international links and support our economic ambitions. For instance, we have 15 new trade specialists in key markets. We've doubled the Global Scot network to 1,200 people in 60 markets and grown the Trade and Investment Envoy network. Through Scottish Development International, we also provide exporting programmes, including trade missions, trade shows, exhibitions and ministerial visits. And through the International Trade Partnership with the Scottish Chamber of Commerce, we also fund trade missions for new exporters. Direct and resilient transport links are, of course, also key to effective international connectivity, and we are working continuously with partners to understand how best to service them.
Annabel Ewing.
I thank the Minister for his answer. He will be aware of the efforts by DFDS to seek to re-establish a direct ferry route for passengers and freight between Rosyth in my constituency and Dunkirk, France's third largest port and 20 minutes from France's most significant fish market. The opportunities for Scotland's exporters and for tourism are significant, but to date, DFDS has, I understand, come up against a bit of a brick wall with Scottish Government officials. Will the Minister therefore arrange to meet with DFDS to see what, if anything, the Scottish Government can do to help unlock the huge potential for Scotland of such a direct link with the key markets of the European continent?
Minister.
I just would like to assure the member that the Scottish Government has conducted extensive discussions with the promoters of the potential Rosyth-Dunkirk ferry service, and indeed the Cabinet Secretary for Transport has met with them and also held discussions with UK Government counterparts as well. I know the Deputy First Minister would be very happy to pick up on those discussions with DS and indeed the member if required, and the Scottish Government would welcome any expansion to current facilities at Rosyth to enable a new service to be introduced, although this would primarily be a financial and commercial decision for Forth Ports and potential operators to make.
And briefly, Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Air links are very important in terms of promoting economic development. What is the Scottish Government's current policy in relation to the devolution of air passenger duty? Is it still working towards that? And if so, and air passenger duty becomes air departure tax, what is the Government's policy about adjusting either up or down the current rates?
Minister.
Well, air links are very important, of course, for Scotland in terms of our global connections, also internally as well. And, of course, we continue to have discussions over these issues the member mentions as well. And, of course, the Scottish Government, speaking as Tourism Minister, I know my transport colleagues have assistance available to help establish new links, direct links from Scotland as well, which is very important for both business and tourism also.
Question 4, Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions the Economy Secretary has had with ministerial colleagues regarding any economic impact of delaying the full dualling of the A96 in light of the Murray and Inverness Chambers of Commerce calling for the road to be dualled in full and raising concerns that delays to delivering this are constraining economic growth in the area.
Minister Tom Arthur.
The Scottish Government fully recognises the crucial role transport infrastructure has in supporting sustainable economic growth and access to essential services. In terms of the A96, the Government's position has not changed. We remain in favour of full dualling of the A96 and we are progressing the dualling process from Inverness to Nairn, including Nairn bypass. Feedback received from the consultation on the draft outcomes of the A96 corridor review, including from Murray and Inverness Chambers of Commerce, will be key in helping inform our final decision on how best to take forward improvements to the A96.
Douglas Ross.
Sorry, the Deputy First Minister herself couldn't answer this question because it was framed in such a way to elicit a response from almost the very top of government. But can I ask the Minister if he agrees with the two Chambers of Commerce who say in their letter that the lack of progress on this vital project is causing increasing frustration and economic constraint, and also the lost decade of inactivity has stifled the potential for economic growth? Does he agree with those comments from Murray and Inverness Chambers of Commerce? And can he tell us how many people have responded to the most recent consultation on the A96 corridor review, and when will we hear the Scottish Government's response to that?
Minister. Last question. The total number of responses is just over 1,400. It is now under active consideration by Transport Scotland, and the Cabinet Secretary will, of course, update the Parliament at the conclusion of that process. I would want to reassure the member and indeed Inverness and Murray Chamber of Commerce that I very much recognise the significant and crucial role that transport infrastructure links play in ensuring economic development. And it is something that I think we are all united in the Chamber in recognising that. And as I say to the member, I am happy to continue to engage constructively with our Chambers of Commerce on these issues, as I have been engaging with other Chambers of Commerce elsewhere in Scotland on the transport infrastructure issue. And I can assure the member that, and the Chambers of Commerce, that this has the full attention of the Government.
And brief supplementary, Fergus Hugh.
Given the serial breaches to dual the A96 by 2030, and the fact that the A96 connects Aberdeen, the capital of European capital of renewable energy, with the Highlands, the powerhouse for renewable energy, the #1 priority for the Government, why should the Highlands be expected to deliver all this with a goat track connecting these two areas? And does the Minister agree with me that it's simply impossible to defend the failure of the Scottish Government to implement its policies promised in every election since 2011?
Minister.
Well, I recognise the member's tenacious campaigning on this matter for his constituents and the wider region. And as I've set out in my original answer to Mr Ross, I very much recognise the significant importance of that arterial route for the economic prosperity, not just of the North East and the Highlands, but of the whole of Scotland. As a member will be well aware, we endured 14 years of austerity and an exceptionally turbulent period which has impacted upon the delivery of a number of infrastructure projects. But as I set out in my original answer, the Government's position has not changed. We remain in favour of full dualling of the A96, and we are progressing the dualling process from Inverness to Nairn, including the Nairn bypass.
Question 5, Sue Webber.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions economy ministers have had with ministerial colleagues regarding what steps it is taking to improve regulatory clarity and reduce compliance costs for self-catering accommodation businesses.
Minister Richard Lockhead. Minister Tom Arthur.
Ministers engage across government on a range of issues where sectors may be impacted by regulation. In relation to the self-catering accommodation sector, this includes engagement on a range of regulatory issues that relate to the visited economy to ensure there is clarity and appropriate guidance on implementation and compliance, including where necessary on working in partnership with local authorities and public bodies where they have a role in application and support for self-catering businesses. We have also commissioned Visit Scotland to chair an expert guidance group, bringing together expertise from across the industry and local authorities to provide recommendations on clarifying the short-term let guidance to operators and licensing authorities. Visit Scotland will present their recommendations on this in March.
Sue Webber.
I thank the Minister for that response. However, Presiding Officer, we are at risk of losing the valuable, productive economic sector of self-catering accommodation businesses. These small local businesses are under attack, forced out with demands for planning applications from local authorities, most notably here in the City of Edinburgh. Shockingly, this is despite judicial rulings saying these permissions are not mandatory for self-catering operators who were in business before September 2022. These practices contradict judicial rulings and appear arbitrary and inconsistent between local authorities. Lord Braid has rightly described them as oppressive and disproportionate. What immediate steps, Minister, will the Scottish Government take to ensure that local authorities abide by the law and end the unjust imposition of planning requirements on self-catering operators courts have already ruled lawful?
As a member will appreciate, local authorities are autonomous bodies, and as such, like any other public bodies, they have to uphold and comply with the law. With regard to what the Scottish Government has undertaken, as I said earlier, we have commissioned Visit Scotland to chair that expert guidance group, which is bringing expertise together from across the industry, and we are anticipating that Visit Scotland will present these recommendations this month.
Question 6, Ben McPherson.
Ask the Scottish Government how it is supporting Edinburgh's economy.
Deputy First Minister.
Growing the economies of our cities and regions is a priority for the Government, and we are investing significant time, effort and funding in this area. In addition to the £300 million investment in the Edinburgh and South East Scotland City Region deal, which is supporting infrastructure and innovation to drive growth, and the range of benefits being delivered through the Fourth Green Freeport, we have also invested nearly £70 million in regeneration projects across Edinburgh, all aimed at creating jobs and supporting individuals, businesses and communities.
Ben McPherson.
As the Cabinet Secretary has stated, there is much being invested in Edinburgh and the Edinburgh economy is thriving. And that is driving significant population growth, which creates additional pressures on services and housing demand. COSLA's distribution formula determines the allocation City of Edinburgh Council gets for its budget. But how is the Scottish Government providing separate funding streams to meet Edinburgh's growing needs, like the investment in Granton, which the First Minister announced today in my constituency? And what more can the Scottish Government do to support this growth and the pressures that it puts on our population?
Deputy First Minister.
The member is absolutely right to draw a distinction between the standard general revenue grant that local authorities receive and the extra an additional funding that is invested in particular areas of Scotland. Ben Macpherson mentioned Granton. I believe that the First Minister visited Granton this very day to hear about Edinburgh Council's ambitious programme of investment for the area. And we have also been boosting the city's budget with a further £16.8 million to over £51 million to support affordable housing. That totals £160 million in the last 3 financial years. We are accepting bids to several funds to support the first phase of the Granton investment programme, including the Housing Infrastructure Fund.
Question 7, Faisal Chowdhury.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what resources it has allocated to projects in the Edinburgh and South East Scotland City Region deal, including transport projects.
Minister Tom Arthur.
The Scottish Government has committed £300 million to the Edinburgh and South East Scotland City Region deal. The projects that will be supported were selected by deal partners and include £120 million for improvements at the Sheriff Hall roundabout, £20 million for public transport improvements in West Edinburgh, £65 million for housing, £60 million for innovation and infrastructure to drive business growth, £10 million for the Dinard Centre, which will create a world-class music venue at the heart of Edinburgh, and £25 million to develop the skills base needed by employers.
Faisal Chowdhury.
Thank you for that answer. One of the key interventions to drive inclusive growth in the City Region deal is improving connectivity. A train station from Winchborough in West Lothian could unlock millions in decongestion benefits and strengthen the millions already invested in the area by developers. Council have planned on applying for funding from the City Region deal. Does the Minister agree that these are exactly the type of projects that should be funded?
Minister.
Well, I appreciate the points that the member's raising, but he'll be appreciated that a proposed Winchborough railway station is not something that is deal funded. And as I set out in my original answer, the funding through the deal is now fully committed. But of course, happy to have further discussions and engagement with the member more widely.
Thank you. A brief supplementary. Colin Beattie.
The Edinburgh and South East Scotland deal includes the highly successful data-driven innovation programme. Edinburgh has long been a leading AI and robotics zone in the UK. It is therefore highly disappointing when the UK Government announced Oxford as the UK's first AI growth zone and reneged on the commitment to Edinburgh as the home of the UK's first and world's third exascale supercomputer. Does the Deputy First Minister share my concerns that the Labour Government is bypassing long-standing economic investment opportunities in Scotland?
Minister.
As noted by my colleague, the Minister for Business, the Scottish Government is deeply concerned to learn that much-needed UK Government investment, which could cite the exascale supercomputer at Edinburgh University, is now in doubt. I share the member's concerns on this issue, given Edinburgh University play a central role in the UK's data science innovation sector. Both the Minister for Business and I are collectively and actively engaging on this, and the Deputy First Minister has written to the Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology to make the point that Scotland is well placed to play a leading role in hosting AI growth zones and vital AI infrastructure, and that the exascale should be looked at again as part of the spending review. We are currently awaiting a response.
Thank you. Question 8, Fulton McGregor.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how it plans to further support Gaelic at a local level in light of the announcement of North Lanarkshire's first ever local mod, which will take place this September.
Deputy First Minister.
Let me first offer my congratulations to North Lanarkshire Council and to Common Gaelach for working together to establish a local mod in North Lanarkshire. Excellent news and builds on and adds to the many Gaelic activities already available in the council area, and obviously provides opportunities for young people to use the language, strengthen their Gaelic skills, but perhaps even more than that, strengthen their musical skills and a range of cultural skills. There are a range of measures in place which do support Gaelic at a local level. Local authority support for Gaelic medium education, the work of Gaelic bodies such as Féisceann and Gael, in Common Gaelach, Common and Parent, and the work of Gaelic development officers. And all that work will be strengthened by the provisions in the Scottish Languages Bill.
Fulton McGregor.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. I too welcome the announcement of the mod, which will help foster and develop the Gaelic language in an area such as mine, which traditionally wouldn't have been considered a Gaelic-speaking heartland, certainly that is compared to the Cabinet Secretary's constituency. From a strictly social perspective, promoting other languages helps preserve our heritage, engage with communities and improves our cultural awareness. So can I ask how the Scottish Government can work with councils to ensure Gaelic initiatives receive sustained support at the local level, especially in areas out with stronger Gaelic-speaking regions? And how does it intend to build on events like the North Lanarkshire Mod to create a lasting legacy for Gaelic in the region?
As briefly as possible, Deputy First Minister.
I think that the member is absolutely right to highlight those points, and we do support and work with councils to ensure that Gaelic initiatives receive sustained support. And it's worth just making the point that this isn't only about, let's say, Gaelic-speaking families. I think that the Scottish traditional music scene would be far, far poorer without local mods and without Fashion and Gael, and commend both of those organisations and look forward to continued support for the efforts in North Lanarkshire.
Thank you. That concludes portfolio questions on Deputy First Minister responsibilities. There will be a brief pause before we move to the next portfolio to allow front benches to change. Okay, the next portfolio is Finance and Local Government. I would remind members that questions 2 and 4 have been grouped. I'll be taking any supplementaries on those after the substantive questions have been answered. Anybody looking to ask a supplementary should press the request to speak buttons during the relevant questions. Again, there's a lot of interest in supplementaries, so brevity will be required in both questions and responses. Call question number 1, Tim Eagle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how it monitors the way in which local authorities engage with stakeholders regarding the implementation of the Visitor Levy Scotland Act 2024.
Minister Ivan McKee.
Councils that introduce a visitor levy are required to establish a visitor levy forum. Membership is drawn from local businesses and provides views on the scheme. Scottish Government officials continue to liaise with Visit Scotland, considering how best to build on the work of the expert working group, and the Scottish Government will conduct a full review of the operation of the Visitor Levy Act within 3 years of the introduction of the first scheme.
Tim Eagle.
A month after asking the Minister another question on the visitor levy, my inbox remains full of emails from worried constituents about the disaster that is the visitor levy. As more details have come out, businesses have highlighted with local authorities and myself that the proposed spreadsheet to collect data is a massive overreach of power and hugely burdensome to businesses. With the pressures of falling into a VAT trap, businesses having extra costs to administer the scheme and other issues, will the Scottish Government work with authorities to review what data actually needs to be collected, or better, finally pause the rollout of this scheme?
Minister.
Well, I can commit that we will continue to work with local authorities and indeed with businesses and business organisations to ensure that we make the process as streamlined as possible, and to work with those organisations to understand how to make the scheme deliver on its intention, but produce leveraging as little an administrative and other impact on businesses as possible.
Thank you. Question 2, Jackie Dunbar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how it is supporting Aberdeen City Council to manage the impact of the UK Government's increase to employer national insurance contributions.
Cabinet Secretary Shona Robertson.
We have sought to protect all local authorities from the impact of the UK Government's increase to employers' national insurance contributions by providing record funding through the local government settlement. In 2025-26, Aberdeen City Council will receive £505.1 million to fund local services and an additional 8% compared to the 2024-25 budget. A further £5.4 million to specifically contribute to the cost of meeting the increased costs of the UK Government's changes to employers' national insurance contributions was confirmed at stage 1 of the budget bill.
Jackie Dunbar.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Scotland's councils are being left to make difficult decisions about whether to increase council tax bills or cut back on services due to Labour's reckless decision to increase employer national insurance contributions and not cover the cost. I'm aware that Aberdeen City Council are setting their budget today, and most, if not all, of that proposed increase will be used to pay for this. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that the Labour UK Government must stop
twiddling their thumbs and agree to fund this additional public sector costs in full? And will she join me in calling on all Scottish Labour MSPs with the SNP to put pressure on their Westminster colleagues to reverse this ill-thought-through decision?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, first of all, can I say to Jackie Dunbar that the Scottish Government will absolutely continue to press the UK Government to fully fund the increase from employers' national insurance contributions. It's not just Scotland that's affected. All of the devolved administrations have a gap in the funding between what is being provided from Treasury through Barnett and what the actual cost is. And I certainly would welcome support from across the Parliament in this respect, as Jackie Dunbar has suggested. I don't believe Scotland should be penalised for investing in public services, and therefore the UK Government must fully fund the actual cost of the increase for the public sector here in Scotland, which of course is an issue we will continue to press the Treasury for.
Question 4, Claire Haughey.
To ask the Scottish Government, in light of the UK Government increasing employer national insurance contributions, how it is supporting local authority finances.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the Scottish Government will continue to support local authority finances and we will continue to make the case jointly with COSLA and Civic Scotland that His Majesty's Treasury must fully fund the actual costs for the changes to employers' national insurance contributions on Scotland's public sector. In the interim, we have provided over £15 billion of funding through the local government settlement, as well as committing £144 million to specifically contribute to the increased cost of employers' national insurance contributions.
Claire Haughey.
South Lanarkshire Council have estimated that the UK Government's changes in employer national insurance contributions will cost the Council around £15 million a year. In order to close this funding gap, the Labour administration at the Council unveiled a 6.5% council tax increase, which is set to raise the local authority £9.5 million. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that the Scottish Government's record funding to South Lanarkshire Council would have allowed the local authority to properly invest in our communities, but instead this has been curtailed due to Labour's national insurance tax rise?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, let me agree with Claire Haughey that the cost of the UK Government's employer national insurance contribution shortfall of funding is an opportunity gap for Scotland's public services. With our partners in COSLA, we've repeatedly raised concerns with the UK Treasury about the impact on public services if this reserved tax increase is not fully funded. As I already confirmed to Jackie Dunbar, I think it's incumbent on all members of this place to protect public services in Scotland by calling on the Chancellor to fully fund the impact on public services, not just here in Scotland, but across the other devolved administrations.
A couple of brief supplementaries. They will need to be brief. First, Finlay Carson.
No.
That's very brief. I'll call Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Labour's increase in employers' national insurance contribution is not only damaging to private and public sector, but also a shameful and direct violation of an explicit manifesto promise. The SNP government have tried to put out their budget this year as some sort of salvation for councils. It is not. The high council tax increases we are seeing councils having to resort to proves this. So, Cabinet Secretary, are you at least willing to acknowledge the reality that the financial position Scotland's councils have been put in for 25-26 is extremely challenging?
I will not be recognising anything through the Chair. Mr Stewart, Cabinet Secretary.
Well, can I say to Alexander Stewart two things. Firstly, that we have provided a record level of funding for local government, £15 billion, something that has been recognised by COSLA, which is, of course, a cross-party organisation. Secondly, we have, of course, given as much funding for the employers' national insurance contribution as we are able to, given the funding that we are likely to receive from the Treasury. But finally, if we had listened to Alexander Stewart, we would have £1 billion of unfunded tax cuts to the budget, which would have meant less money to local government, not more money, less money to local government. The Tories have no credibility on this issue.
Question 3, Michael Manna.
The Scottish Government what its response is to the IFS's assessment in its Scottish Budget 2025-26 report that it is particularly important that the front-loaded increases in investment and public service spending planned are undertaken effectively.
Minister.
Following last week's approval of the Scottish Budget for 2025-26, this Government will continue to ensure delivery across our collective priorities, including to tackle child poverty, support public services and promote economic growth.
Michael Mara.
Thank the Minister for that answer. There has, of course, this year been an uplift in capital from the UK Labour Government of £610 million to the budget. But we have to ask whether this Government is capable or competent enough to actually spend it effectively. For starters, it's been hard to do any of that when the Government hasn't even published a capital spending plan for nearly 2 years. It was promised in December 23, March 24, May 24, December 24. Now, in March 25, there's still no sign of it, with the Government seemingly kicking it into the long grass of autumn 2025. So, Presiding Officer, can the Minister tell us on what date will this long-awaited and vital document actually be published?
Minister.
Well, I think the members had indicated that document will be published later in the autumn of this year. But, of course, it's important that we recognise that this will follow on from the UK spending review, which is hugely important information for us to gather. And Michael Marr asks us about the quotes from the IFS report, but preceding the quote that he used as the words "in this context." And what does the report say about that context? It talks about a planned slowdown in increases in UK government spending. It talks about the outlook will become much clearer after the UK's government's multi-year spending review on the 11th of June. And it also goes on to say it seems highly likely that overall funding increases will be smaller for at least several years from 2026 to 27 onwards. So we've got a Labour MSP asking the Scottish Government how we are going to manage in an environment where there's a planned slowdown in increases in funding to the Scottish Government from the UK Labour Government. So I think if he wants to make an impact, a serious impact here, he should go and put pressure on his colleagues in Westminster to not slow down increases in funding to the Scottish Government from the years from 2026-27 onwards.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you.
A couple of supplementaries. First from Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. A sudden jump in capital resource without an increase in capacity is likely to feed construction inflation. However, the Scottish Fiscal Commission made clear that in real terms our capital allocation will then flatline and by 2029-30 will be lower than in 2022-23. Does the Minister agree that to deliver long-term investment and sustainable growth in infrastructure and the economy, available capital must grow consistently in real terms each year? And will he continue to make that case to the UK Government?
Minister.
Of course, I agree, and that just reinforces the point I was making earlier. After years of underinvestment by the UK Government, our capital funding must grow in real terms in order to deliver long-term investment and sustainable growth in infrastructure and the economy. My colleague, the Cabinet Secretary for Finance, has called on the UK Government a number of times to increase investment in infrastructure and will continue to do so to make the case to ensure we have the capital budget available to deliver on our priorities for the people of Scotland.
Briefly, Craig Hoy.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The IFS's Scottish Budget Report states that the Scottish Government should be more transparent about what it intends for year-on-year changes in spending by consistently comparing plans for the coming year with the latest plans for the current year. Even now, we see that there's £350 million in money sitting unallocated for this year, with no real clarity about where it will ultimately be spent. Now, I accept the Government must keep money back for certain circumstances, but doesn't this Government's smoke and mirrors around its budget and portfolio allocations raise suspicion that the SNP moves money around in order to give a false and misleading headline-grabbing impression of where resources are going and how much is being spent? And as we look forward to the medium-term fiscal strategy, will this Government commit to greater transparency on how it uses what is, after all, taxpayers' money?
First of all, the transparency of the information we published to FPAC and publicly has been increasing and continues to increase. There's no shortage of information out there. And the point that Craig Hoy makes about moving money around, of course we move money to make sure, first of all, that we balance our budget, and secondly, that we focus on what the priorities are as we move towards the year end. Anyway, the answer, I answered the question himself. He recognises that £350 million is there to address issues that, of course, will come up as we move towards the year-end, around the year-end audit adjustments, around changes in demand-driven budget lines, around uncertainty around about the final tax position, around other uncertainties in terms of income to the Scottish Government. And he recognises himself, and I think the question he poses to me, that it's important that we do have that fund there in order to be able to address those issues in a controlled and prudent way, and to ensure that this Government continues to balance its budget.
Thank you. Question 5, Liz Smith.
Ask the Scottish Government what its response is to the reported comment by the Scottish Information Commissioner that Scotland's non-departmental public bodies, also known as Quangos, are costing £6.6 billion a year.
Minister.
I don't recognise the £6.6 billion costs that are referred to, but members should know data supplied by public bodies for 22-23 that were published at the end of last year indicates the total resource expenditure by public bodies was over £23 billion to deliver a huge range of services, including in health, education, justice and elsewhere. Of this, public bodies spent almost £1.3 billion on running their corporate functions. Another £2.3 billion was spent by those corporate functions. Public bodies passed through funding of over £7.6 billion to other organisations, including third sector and public sector organisations, and an additional £800 million was spent on the Scottish Government's own operating costs. It's our intention to continue to collect this data on an ongoing basis to enable identification of further opportunities for more cost reductions through the removal of duplication and increased efficiency in service delivery.
Liz Smith.
Can I thank the Minister for that, but nonetheless the very serious concerns that have been issued by the Information Commissioner, and whatever the total is, and I'll have to say that I think it's strange that the Scottish Government's questioning what the Information Commissioner has said. Will the Minister make an absolute commitment, in light of what the Finance Committee's concerns are, to ensure that the number of Quangos in Scotland is reduced and that we get some greater transparency and scrutiny about how that will happen?
Minister.
I think the member, first of all, the number of Quangos, as she calls them, has been reduced, and we published data that shows that that's come down from 199 when we took over to 131 at the moment. So there has been a significant reduction there. But the important point is the data, and I'm frankly disappointed that the member hasn't gone and looked up the extensive quantity of data that we published on precisely this point, down to a very high level of granularity just at the end of last year, because we are absolutely committed to being transparent about that data, to understanding where there are opportunities to drive further cost savings across public bodies' running costs, on top of the £280 million that we've already delivered over this year and last year, and the £300 million we're going to deliver over the next 2 years.
Briefly, Fergus Ewing.
Quangos and other public bodies have had access to the £200 million Heat and Buildings Decarbonisation Fund. One successful application was a public body headquartered at 25 Chambers Street, Edinburgh, valued before the works at £4.75 million. The works cost £11.3 million and the grant was £9.1 million. That's the headquarters of no less than the Crown Office. Hasn't the Crown Office committed a major offence against the public purse?
Minister.
I thank the member for the question. As the member knows, we are hugely committed to identifying and ensuring that any use of public funding that is excessive is addressed. He knows fine well that the example he cites there and other examples have been cited we are very focused, as I said, on making sure that where we do invest any money of that sort going forward is done taking into account the value of the premises that investment is made in, to make sure that public funds are applied most effectively and efficiently.
Question 6, Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government, as part of the cross-government coordination of infrastructure, what discussions the Finance Secretary has had with ministerial colleagues regarding what consideration is given to national security in its infrastructure policy.
Cabinet Secretary.
While national security is a reserved responsibility of the UK Government, there are devolved powers relevant to national security. Critical national infrastructure are the facilities, systems, sites, information, people, returns and processes deemed necessary for a country to function. There are currently 13 official designated critical national infrastructure sectors where responsibility is split between devolved administrations and the UK Government. National security concerns are brought forward and given appropriate prominence in budget negotiations and infrastructure prioritisation.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Very grateful for that reply. The European Union is currently investigating Chinese renewable energy manufacturers on the grounds of interference by the Chinese Communist Party. Norway has rejected their involvement in Norwegian offshore wind projects, but the Scottish Government, through its Wind Energy Council, has ignored this and listed Mingyang Smart Energy Group as a priority bidder for infrastructure in our North Sea wind farms. Scotland is already worryingly dependent on Chinese money, particularly in our universities. We need to be very careful about its involvement in renewable energy. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, what thought has the Scottish Government given to the risks of inviting Chinese companies into the heart of Scotland's energy infrastructure?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, let me say from a broad response to Alec Cole-Hamilton that I recognise the issue that he is raising, and we should all be very vigilant and cognizant of the points that he is making. In relation to the offshore wind infrastructure projects, I think what I would probably prefer to do is to make sure that Alec Cole-Hamilton gets a written response specifically addressing the points that he's making. It sits slightly out with my direct ministerial responsibility. I want to make sure he gets an accurate response, so I'll make sure that he gets that in writing.
Thank you. Question 7, Marie McNair.
To ask the Scottish Government how it is supporting local authorities such as West and East Dunbartonshire councils that have to make PFI and PPP repayments.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government provides funding in support to local authorities for payments relating to their PFI and PPP contracts by way of the annual local government settlement.
Marie McNair.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. In my constituency, the equivalent of 37.9% of council tax in East Dunbartonshire and 41.2% of council tax in West Dunbartonshire goes on PPP repayments. That is a shocking amount. Labour's financial mismanagement has clearly had severe consequences, and these wasteful deals are being paid back by the council taxpayer. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that this highlights why the Labour Party can't be trusted to manage Scotland's finances?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, can I agree with Marie McNair? This government has always made clear that the PFI approach used previously by Labour has not delivered best value for the taxpayer, and that's why we brought it to an end and introduced more affordable schemes to reduce the drain on the public purse and to stop the excessive profits. We are, of course, however, unfortunately still paying for the legacy of those mistakes and will be for many years. And I think it's a timely reminder of the incompetence of Labour in government on these matters.
Question 8, Finlay Carson.
To ask the Scottish Government how the total funding that is provided for local government has changed over the last decade in real terms and as a proportion of total spending.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, first of all, given the changes in the Scottish Government's devolved powers over the last decade, we need to be cognisant of the fact it's not possible to apply direct like-for-like comparisons in Scottish Government funding levels, notably due to the devolution of around £5.6 billion for the administration of social security benefits. However, what I can say is that the local government finance settlement has increased by 41% since 2015-16. That's a real terms increase of 2.4%.
Finlay Carson.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. Presiding Officer, can it be easy to focus on just short-term developments as the cause of issues Scotland faces instead of looking at the full picture? But we must look at the full picture because we need to know, beg your pardon, we need to know why council are struggling to provide key local services as we can see they are. Despite the shameful spin from Shona Robison, the real picture of the last decade shows how, under the SNP, real terms funding for local councils in the form of general revenue grant has stagnated, not increasing by even 1% despite the size of the Scottish Government's budget increasing by nearly 20%. Yet local authorities like Dumfries and Galloway are still having to grapple with rising staff costs, inflation and service pressures such as children residential placements, all of which has resulted in 9% increase in council tax. Can the Cabinet Secretary explain why this government has consistently decided to make local government funding one of its lowest priorities?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, we haven't, and of course the Accounts Commission has confirmed that over the last 3 years there's been a real terms increase in local government funding. As I gave in my first answer, the local government settlement over the last 10 years has increased by 41%. That's a real terms increase of 2.4%. Those are the facts. The other fact is that if we'd listened to Finlay Carson and had unfunded tax cuts of £1 billion, local government would be getting less money, not more money, to fund local services, and that is the reality of the situation.
Mr Hoy, I called you for a question earlier. I've now heard at least 3 interventions since then. Please be quiet. I got a brief supplementary. Fulton McGregor.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the record level of funding for local authorities in this year's budget, which passed last week with cross-party support. Can the Minister outline how this will support local authorities across Scotland to increase and improve services for their communities, in contrast to the 30 councils in England in dire need of a total of £1.5 billion of emergency funding for 25-26, just to keep them afloat?
Briefly, Cabinet Secretary.
Well, and of course that £1.5 billion of emergency funding is the Tory legacy on local government funding. The Local Government Finance Settlement provides local authorities with an additional £1.1 billion of funding, a real terms increase of 5.5%, along with full discretion over council tax. And of course we will continue to work in partnership with COSLA and local authorities to make sure local authority finances are sustainable and communities across Scotland continue to receive the high-quality frontline services they expect and deserve.
Thank you. That concludes portfolio questions. There will be a brief pause before we move to the next item of business to allow front benches to change.